Hello there, everyone. Anyways, now that I'm no longer dying the plague, I can get started. Let me actually get my freaking Google notes up. So if you see me, I have a computer. Nothing weird. I'm looking at my notes. Like what are we talking about today? Maybe I should have my camera in frame so I don't look as weird. This is such a weird angle, but it's fine.
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently.
Anyways, so like personally, I don't really follow Bollywood as much as a lot of other people do. A lot of my friends or like my family does, but you know, like once in a while I'll put on like a Bollywood film, and I do follow a couple of actors and actresses. But I've noticed in like the last couple of years that there's been a couple of like period dramas that have been coming out of Bollywood, and many of them have been taking place in like the 20th century. So for example, Hira Mandi was one that came out on Netflix earlier this year. Gala came out a few years ago. Galank, it's like from like a couple years back. And then there was another one that I was thinking about. It was RRR, that's another one. And then Gangubai. And as somebody who has an interest in fashion history, and especially has an interest in fashion history that isn't super Western oriented, it is nice to see like other films and other period dramas that aren't Western centric. However, as somebody who does study, you know, fashion history, I personally feel like a lot of these films like that have come out very inaccurate when it comes to the costumes. And honestly, some of them are like, you know, rain level bad, if you know what I mean. And I'm not saying that the costume designers or like the Kaligars or like the people who worked on these costumes and built them did not work hard or did not spend a lot of time and thought and effort like designing them. It's just not very accurate most of the time, and it gets worse, especially for like films like Gala, where you have scenes taking place in the 1930s and then scenes taking place in the 1940s. And you can differentiate between which one is 1930s and 1940s because the costume designer didn't like make an effort for that differentiation between the two different timelines. In general, as somebody who has tried to find like academic research and about Indian fashion, especially in the 20th century, there isn't a lot of like academic work on that. When people do talk about it, it's very surface level, and they only seem to be scratching like the outer layers of the subject. Now today for this video, I really wanted to take a deep dive, or as deep of a dive as we can over here, and just look at some of the fashion trends and styles that existed in 1930s India. We'll mostly be focusing on like female fashion and mostly looking at the sari, the blouse, some hair and makeup trends and fashion trends that were present at this time. We will be mainly looking at more just upper class / mainstream fashion at the time, and we'll talk a little bit about some regional differences that are seen in the South Asian area. Forgive me if I keep on going back between South Asia and India. In this video, I'm going to try to say South Asia because we're talking about a time period where India and Pakistan and Nepal and Bangladesh didn't really even exist yet, and they were all mostly under British rule. If I do say, you know, India by mistake, I apologize. I meant to say South Asia. Now, before we also do get started, while there isn't, like I've said before, a lot of academic research that I have found on the subject, there are a couple of bloggers that have been talking about the subject for a very long time, and many of these bloggers / like just people who have interest in fashion history, their research and insights have been really, really helpful in finding out more information. So I really want to give a big shout out to Vintage Indian Clothing on Tumblr, whose insight on Indian historical fashion in the 20th century really helped me make this video possible. I really want to acknowledge her intellectual credit and the research that she does. Many of the photos that will be shown in this video do also come from her Tumblr page. I will be linking her Tumblr page and all of her links down below. You should go look at her stuff and see what she has been writing and she has been posting. It's really interesting material. Now let's get on to the video. We're still recording, good, okay. In the 1937 May-June edition of the Indian Ladies magazine, Sister Susie, who is the author of the Our Fashion Suggestions column, writes, entitled Westernizing Tendencies, Backless Blouses. It is the vogue now among society Indian women to dress differently for each occasion, and for different times of the day, thus making the fashions of the sari as variable as the frock. Hitherto, an evening function may have been graced with a slightly grander sari than that worn in the morning. But today, the whole style has to change, and the ensemble for after-dinner wear, among the ultra-modern, resembles more the evening dress of a European woman than an Indian sari. Now, the Indian Ladies magazine is a magazine that existed in the first half of the 20th century. It had two runs. One between like 1901 and 1918, and another second run in the 1930s and the 1940s. This magazine was written for more upper class / Christian Indian women. I suspect it was mostly for Christian Indian women. It is mostly written in English. Much of the content includes short stories media. They talk about like women's rights at the time, talk about movies that are popular at the time, and like women's rights and just like issues that are going on in India at this time. All of the copies of the Indian Ladies magazine can be found on the Tamil Digital Library. I will also link this down below. In many of her articles, Sister Susie tends to talk about how many of the girls and women that she observes and she interacts with in this time take inspiration from Western fashion trends, especially when it comes to hair, makeup, and nails. This also applies to blouse and some sari materials, which we will get into later. This will include, bobbed hair, finger waves, buns at the nape, which was something that already existed in India before British rule, existed in South Asia before British rule. 1930s styles of makeup, which uses rouge, mascara, thin eyebrows. The bobbed hair, the finger waves, and the buns at the nape of the neck, these are all things that are popular amongst many women in India at this time. In addition, a lot of women at this time are shown to have wearing their balus over their head. This makes sense as most of South Asia was under British colonial rule, and as we know, many different aspects of British law and values in society were integrated into the South Asian society. And because of this, as people today look up to, actors and monarchs for fashion trends, many also looked up to the British at this time for fashion trends and ideals. In the 1934 March-April edition of the Indian Ladies magazine, the author notes that no doubt the Indian woman never gives up her sari, but how often does she change the fashion of it, or its accompaniments, in accordance to European fashion? Changes in the bodice of various kinds, fashions in footwear and in chauffeurs, alterations in the style of sari, often detract from the grace of Indian women's dress, sometimes even looking ridiculous. When it comes to this time and period, there is a desire to adopt certain British styles of aesthetics or makeup, but still keeping to their Indian roots. So you do see in the fashions at this time and in many different eras, especially in the colonial eras, of this fusion of Indian and Western or British aesthetics. In addition, Bollywood would also be an influence. Popular Bollywood actresses at this time included Devika Rani, Shanta Apte, Nazim Banu. At this time also, the navy drape, which is the most common sari drape today for most Indian women, became much more common in Bollywood in the 1930s. And then this thus helped popularize it around India. Now, before we get really more into the different saris and the blouse styles at this time, I really want to note that the sari is just a roll of fabric. These saris can be used up for decades. They can be cut into different types of clothes. They can be worn for a couple of decades as it is. Like, for example, my mother still wears saris from 20, 30 years ago. And when she lived back in India, her mom's wedding sari, she used to wear her mom's wedding sari from the 1950s. Even until the 80s or 70s or 80s. And there's only so many ways that you can design a sari and wear it, as it's literally just one piece of fabric. And sari itself isn't something that can be defined a look or a certain look at a time. Just many different components when it comes to a certain look of a decade or a period of time. And then for this, it includes the styling of the sari and how you drape it, and how one puts on their makeup and how one does their hair and the jewelry that they wear. And all these different things do contribute the fashionable look or aesthetic at this time in Indian society. Arguably, the most common type of sari blouse at this time is the sleeveless blouse. It is seen in Bollywood, it is seen in everyday life, it is seen in formal wear. These can be worn with both georgettes, fabrics, and handloom saris. Some can be seen with some frills on the sides, or even on the side, and frills can also be seen in the sari itself. And from a periodical from 1931, this is also the Indian Ladies magazine, the author emphasizes the wearing of plain blouses. Blouses made simply with some Indian floral silk to go with the saris, or just a plain blouse with some embroidery on the shoulders and neckline. The author of this article, and also as it seems many people at this time do prefer their blouses made in this way, as there is like an emphasis in this article about if and when like a blouse is like decked out in beading, sequins, they're considered very over the top, extremely tacky, and something that does not go well with the sari. And overwhelmingly from what I found in like photos and like movies and just like everyday life that I've been able to find, most of the blouses that I've come across are not super decorated with embroidery. Many of them are just made from brocaded fabrics or like Banarasi fabrics or a plain fabric. Additionally, as inspired by the fashions of Europe, many women started wearing their blouses with puff sleeves. This style also tends to bleed into the 1940s. Blouses at the time seem to be made of a contrasting material, or it can be used as a material from the sari itself. Some sari blouses complement the borders of the sari itself. Sister Susie from the December 1930 edition of the Indian Ladies magazines advises that I would advise a blouse of the same material as the sari. If there is more material than needed in the latter, a yard or so can be cut from the inside leg. Some color combinations that are mentioned in the Indian Ladies magazine that were popular at this time were white saris. A brown and gold combination was mentioned in the October 1930 edition. Additionally, in the mid to later parts of the 1930s, starting from February 1935, the author starts talking about how bright colors are coming back into fashion, whilst in the previous 5 years they were more muted. I can definitely confirm that white was a very popular cover color for many women at this time. If you look at some black and white photographs, you can see that most of the saris are definitely white. But when it comes to seeing other colors, it is hard to tell as times because a lot of the photos that I'm looking at are black and white, and colored ones are not always the most accurate in telling what the color of a garment is. In addition, the author in a February 1930 periodical, the author also mentions the use of jarring color combinations, which are considered oriental or too bright. She states in the article, "The other day, while walking around the street, I came across a woman dressed in a mauve blouse and a green and red sari. It gave me a distinct shock to see her, for such a scheme of colors is jarring to the eyes. It upsets the nerves and takes away the feeling of good fellowship towards others. And still there is an innumerable women in India today who are seen dressed in such gruesome color schemes. Should we unhesitantly accuse them of having no taste, or should we be more merciful and say they do it out of thoughtlessness or to the feeling of others? Perhaps if they could see themselves as others see them, they would amend their ways, and perhaps they have their own arguments in defense of their color schemes." Damn. I didn't read this out loud until now, and I'm just like, damn, Sister Susie she really is just dramatic. She's here for the drama. Now on to the topic that most of you guys are probably here for, the sari. Majority of the sari styles that were popular at this time were saris with large borders. Many examples from this time show chiffon or georgette fabrics with large stretches of zari borders stitched onto them. However, borders could be dyed, painted, embroidered with zadorsi and sequins. Additionally, Art Deco designs and aesthetics are also used in border designs with geometric shapes and symmetry. Vintage Indian clothing states that these borders were more common in the later 1930s. She also notes that saris at the time were more loosely draped over the shoulder in the south, pinned to the shoulder with a brooch, and draped over the head in Western India and Bengal, or tucked in the waist, which was more common in Tamil Nadu. I also want to add here that according to the Indian Ladies magazine, at this time it was getting less and less common for younger women to be pinning their saris with brooches. And it was more of a more older fashion, which would make sense by the time in the 1940s, like brooches in on saris is like very uncommon. In the 1934 and 1936 issue of Indian Ladies magazine, the author states that also printed floral fabrics were coming into vogue for saris and blouses. Now, looking at some extents and photographs, unlike the 1960s, where like when we had printed saris, they were extremely bold and very out there. 1930 sari prints were much more understated and more demure in comparison. There are some bold, like more bolder examples per se, as in this example. This is more of an Art Deco look. The Indian Ladies magazine also published many needlework guides, and many of them had like floral designs for sari borders. Additionally, georgette and chiffons were very common fabric choices at this time, as in the 1930s, there was an increased importation of cheap Japanese silk and artificial silks entering into the country. Now, I know some people are going to be asking me about handlooms. To touch a little bit on handlooms, according to the source, Strategies of Survival and Hierarchies of Production, Silk and Weaving in Eastern United Provinces, 1800s to 1930s. The writer notes that Banarsi saris are costly and purchasers wear them mostly on rare or ceremonial occasions. You can see some examples of Banarsi saris and Banarsi fabrics used in Indian fashion at this time. You can see it does exist. Some of them do follow the trends of having like the large borders. Some, just in general from my personal knowledge, handloom fabrics, especially ones with hazari in it, tend to be heavier and just use more thread and thus a lot more costly. Gauzy silk goods, like saris, shirtings, and dupattas, were either plain striped or with colored headings, as a rule without gold or silver work. These were used for formal and evening daily wear. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, everybody. I hope you all learned something new. Please go and check out Vintage Indian Clothing on Tumblr and on Instagram page. If this video does like end up blowing up the internet for some reason, which I highly doubt it will, but if it does, you know, maybe I'll make another video about vintage Indian fashion. Maybe I'll make something about the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, not the 70s. I lose interest after the 70s. But let me know what you think. I also want to apologize for all of the ways I mispronounced everything in this video. I'm a bit of a coconut. I don't know Hindi that well.